So I'm just going to say a few words, ladies and gentlemen, from the perspective of the Irish Medicines Board, and it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the invitation. I'm going to say a quick few words about where we are with biopharmaceuticals, which you guys know all about, but then specifically I'll say a little bit about the IMB and our role, and that will be very familiar to some of you and perhaps a little bit newer to others, and then where we are fixed in terms of our profile nationally and internationally. And this slide, you know, we all know it inside out, but I suppose what it says to me is that it's a very young industry still. We're kind of moving suddenly from where we were in the 50s, and today we're still a very young sector, and there's incredible, exciting things to happen over the next while. Many patients' needs have been served due to advances in biopharmaceutical manufacturing, but biopharmaceuticals are complex and therefore expensive to develop and to manufacture, and therefore the products that are actually finding their way to the patient are inevitably going to be quite expensive, costly products. Some key influences that you're well aware of is the competitive business environment, the more challenging reimbursement rules, which I'll say a quick word about, and then always, I'm sure you'll agree, more onerous regulatory requirements, and then the whole patent issue, which you're well aware of. With regard to the business environment, what we're seeing, certainly from our side, looking in at you, is that the manufacturing operations are becoming more and more efficient. PAT is adding a lot of value. The yields that you're getting are higher and better. There's greater flexibility with actual equipment that you have in your plants, expensive equipment, better utilization of capital, and an overall, I think in Ireland, a significant reduction in overall operating costs. Just on the whole reimbursement issue, and I'm not sure, will Ambrose speak a little bit about that, but there are very substantial budgetary challenges everywhere in healthcare, as you well know, and a lot of tough decisions are having to be made by our policymakers in Ireland and across Europe and across the world. And in the discussion, we might get a chance, if you want to talk a little bit more about HTA and how it's being used, or as I would say in some cases, abused across the world currently in terms of creating bottlenecks and so on. So I think HTA as a concept, as a science, is very, very good. It's a systematic way of looking at the benefit that new products bring over and above what the existing best practice is. But then, having done that analysis, there's obviously a policy question to be made in individual countries about whether, in fact, individual products can be afforded or not in the healthcare service as it is at that particular time. And the growing number of advanced products that we're seeing for cancer therapy and other areas, of course, represent a major challenge for any cost containment measures that are being worked through by governments around the world. Now, to my own area of the regulatory requirements specifically, obviously there are stringent requirements set out in legislation and in practice for the preclinical development and the clinical studies. There's rigorous definition of the manufacturing process for the regulatory submission. All of these products are authorised in Europe via the centralised procedure through the EMA. And meeting ongoing regulatory expectations after the product comes to market is also challenging. Updates to the dossier, GMP requirements, and an even more keen focus on pharmacovigilance commitments since the new pharmacovigilance rules, which have just commenced. Biosimilars is a space that some of you are probably in, and you know what they are. They're only authorised, obviously, after the data exclusivity period has elapsed. The first was authorised for the EEA, by the EMA in the EEA area in April 2006. So again, we're talking very, very recent developments here. And to date, there are 12 authorised, and that's just a profile of the number of products, biosimilars, that are authorised through the centralised process in Europe over these past 5 years or so. So locally, the Irish Medicines Board, our job is protection of public and animal health. That's it, in terms of the high-level answer to the question, what do we do? That's what our mission statement talks about. In fact, the mission statement talks about protect and enhance. So, and there's quite an important nuance in enhancing, and that feeds very much into how we operate and the things that we do. All our staff and all our processes and work are directed towards those aims. We also have a very substantial focus on timely completion of our various regulatory activities. It's a very onerous task to be asked to be the regulator of a particular sector. It's something that we take very seriously. So we have very specific obligations to the sectors that we regulate, and meeting timelines is a very important part of that, be it on producing an inspection report after an inspection, or assessing clinical trials, or whatever it might be. We would suggest in this space that being the competent authority for medical devices as well as medicines is a substantial advantage to us. And in fact, 2 years ago, we moved our own internal structures, where previously we had a human medicines department and a medical devices department with separate reporting lines up to me. We merged those. So now we have a department for pre-market and for post-market of what we term human products. So whether it's a medicine or a medical device or a combination of those or whatever, there is a line management, a director and a line of management responsible for those, which has given us, I think, a substantial advantage in terms of joined up thinking as we move to more and more combination products and so on. Just 2 slides and specifically on our role relating to bio. There are 84 medicines manufacturers plants in Ireland, and we're also the supervisory authority for quite a number of plants abroad. Supervising authority is a European term. It means that we are the EMA doesn't have its own inspectors or doesn't have its own assessors, and I know you all know that. So when a product is coming out of a particular plant, one of the countries is given responsibility for it. So in this case, we'd be given responsibility for a particular product in a particular manufacturing site abroad, and we carry that responsibility for the rest of Europe. In the biopharma sector specifically, there are 11 manufacturing sites, and as you're, I'm sure, aware, there are 2 new facilities at the commissioning stage. This last point is the most important point of what I've said so far in terms of our engagement with regard to manufacturing sites. Our early engagement with companies who are planning to establish a site in Ireland. We have an open door policy. John Lynch is the Director of Compliance in the IMB, and John and his team will meet literally anybody who has an idea about a plant and to talk through the details. We spend days with companies talking through their plans and looking at the detail right down to very fine detail in advance of maybe planning permission or turning a sod or whatever. And this, we are told, adds real value to the engagement and helps companies along the way. If you look at our published strategic plan, you'll see some very specific text around our engagement with industry. The first one says there, improve service delivery within a high quality, risk-based regulatory framework. So a lot of what we do is risk-based. So we should always be talking to you in what you would judge and we would judge together to be proportionate and so on. And also there's a specific text around extending the use of risk-based and proportionate regulation. We are active participants in various initiatives that are going on, but particularly around avoiding or trying to avoid, it's work in progress, I think, duplication of inspections in third countries and assisting in developing tools to identify high-risk sites and trigger inspections to make the best optimal use of this limited inspection resource that exists around the world. You'll know that all of these products in the bio sector are subject to centralized management by the EMA. I've mentioned that already. So it's a European process. There is scientific advice offered in the product development life cycle through the EMA in a very formal process. We're quite involved in that across different products. There are meetings arranged with applicants. And then nationally here, most of you will be aware that we have very successfully run information days for the sector. And then communications policy includes contributions to undergraduate and postgraduate training courses across a range of disciplines, and including some contact with NIBRT, which we're accelerating, and also some engagement with Molecular Medicine Ireland, which we're pleased to be involved with. Just on clinical trials, which is the space for some of you in the room, the process for clinical trials is again going into another phase of review because there's a new regulation just published and starting its process, moving through the European legislative process through Council and then Parliament. It will make substantial progress during our presidency in the first half of next year. But already in the existing, what is the Clinical Trials Directive, there's substantial efforts around streamlining the process, removing duplication with the role of ethics committees, and I'm very pleased to see that HICWA, another state agency in Ireland, is substantially advancing things on the ethics committees area. And again, if we have time or if anybody has any query on that afterwards, I'm happy to talk about it. There are very much predictable timelines in the application for clinical trials. We are always available to meet sponsors prior to advanced therapy medicinal product trials. We have access to specific expertise in-house through our clinical trials subcommittee, and outside where necessary. We have built networks at home and abroad that allow us to do that. And then on the inspection side, we have a risk-based GCP inspections to evaluate subject safety and data integrity. We're involved in the EMA quite substantially in contributing as rapporteur and co-rapporteur in the centralised procedures. Probably, I always say, probably 5 or 6 or 7 times the size of what you might expect from an agency of our size. We're quite a strong contributor at committees and working parties involved in development of guidelines and so on, and we have very much a long-term involvement in the ICH process. Vigilance, there's a lot happening in that space. There's a new committee established, the PRAC, Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee, just since July under the new regulations. There's a chair, which is June Rain from the UK, MHRA, and the vice chair is Dr. Alva Spooner, one of our colleagues. So again, that's quite a high profile and a substantial commitment for us at that level. The Management Board, you'll be aware that I'm a member there and have been chair for 4 years until 2011. We talk a lot there. Boards do talk a lot, but we talk a lot about trying to optimize the way the centralized process works for all of the stakeholders. And we also talk in Europe about increasing the cooperation with key regulators across the globe. The obvious ones that you'll think about, FDA, Health Canada, and so on and so on. There's also a program going on about pilot joint inspections and assessments, and there's about 7 or 8 countries involved in that, of which we're one. At my level, which is being the head or the chief executive of a medicines regulatory agency, we have in Europe 47 of those across all the member states. We have a very strong coordination so that we have a coherent approach across all of the member states. We have a very strong focus on patient safety and on streamlining processes to minimise the duplication. We're well aware of our limited resource. And then there's a very, very strong focus on facilitating the conduct of research and development in Europe. There is established on a voluntary basis through the Heads of Medicines Agency what's called the Clinical Trials Facilitation Group, which is now working quite well for the past couple of years, which is a way of bringing countries together in a voluntary way. And that's now being reflected, I think, largely in the new regulation that's now drafted and published for clinical trials. That will be very much what will appear in the new arrangements. Sorry, the last thing there was about medical devices. We're working closely, but I've said that already about ourselves in Ireland, and that's happening in Europe. There's also an international summit of medicines regulators involving about 22 countries. And again, it's the obvious ones that you would think of, but you say, well, it's not obvious that Ireland would be there, but we are. There are 6 countries from Europe involved in it, and then China, India, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Health Canada, US FDA, Mexico, Brazil, Singapore. So most of the major blocks, and 2 countries from Africa as well, South Africa and Nigeria. A lot of effort going on there about focusing on common problems and challenges, converging, trying to converge more and more in the way we approach assessment work and inspection requirements, sharing of resources, sharing of inspection plans, for example, and inspection reports and so on. And there's a substantial step being proposed currently on moving that to the next level of engagement. So as a final slide, just to say that our task is to ensure patient safety, and the way we try and do that is through scientific rigour of everything that we do ourselves. We also want to ensure that patients have early access to treatments with innovative medicines, and we do that via open dialogue with applicants and manufacturers, with predictable timelines, and being as effective as we can be as a contributor to the European and global regulatory processes. 17 minutes. Thank you.